Now, the Canberra bubble has gone into meltdown over last night's fascinating interview on the Bolt Report when Andrew Bolt grilled new Liberal MP Gladys Liu over claims she was previously an active member of organisations closely linked to Beijing's communist regime. Liu's answers to questions about whether she had belonged to two Chinese-based China Overseas Exchange Associations up until a few years ago were less than convincing. She says she recalls no connection at all and claims she might have been listed as a member without her knowledge. Now, this stuff is very suspicious and it needs clarification. But we also need to be very careful about avoiding some kind of McCarthyist pursuit of any Chinese Australian with links to their homeland. After all, any links to mainland China are by definition links to a communist regime. And it doesn't mean you have divided loyalties. Still, as I say, Liu must clarify all of this, and the sooner the better. We're waiting on a statement from her as we speak. But as for her position on Chinese island building and militarisation in the South China Sea, this is where there's a media beat-up and a political pile-on against Liu that just doesn't stack up so far. In her interview, she was clear about supporting Australian interests and policy, and she stopped short of condemning China's action as illegal.
This is a matter for the foreign minister. I definitely would put Australia's interests first, and that's exactly what I have been doing. I look after my electorate of Chisholm, and I work with the government to put interests of Australians first.
Now, could she have expressed this position more clearly and confidently? Sure. But my point is that what she said is very much in keeping with Australia's foreign policy. It's not at odds with what Australian politicians say. Sure, we might think that China is acting illegally, and certainly Australia supports an international ruling against China, but we don't condemn China's actions as illegal in such direct terms. We just haven't done that. Here's Foreign Minister Marise Payne about a year ago when she was Defence Minister.
Recasting of the rules needs to be a transparent and collective effort, open to international scrutiny, especially but not only if it affects the global commons. Nations must also have the right to be free from coercion or criticism when they lawfully and reasonably communicate concerns about the behaviour of others.
There you go, fairly nuanced to say the least. And just a few weeks ago, watch how these careful and benign words from Scott Morrison in Vietnam were correctly, in my view, interpreted by the ABC and others as a shot across China's bow.
Partners for a stable, peaceful, prosperous and independent region, a region of sovereign independent states, resistant to coercion, but open to engagement on the basis of shared interests.
That could be interpreted as a thinly veiled swipe at Beijing's aggressive actions in the South China Sea.
So Australia's position on competing claims in the South China Sea is carefully nuanced. I would say it's a little too soft, but the point is that Gladys Liu did not get it wrong, and she certainly didn't push China's position. Remember also just weeks ago when Liberal backbencher Andrew Hastie talked frankly about the strategic challenge of China for Australia and our region. And the Labor Party and the Canberra bubble then accused him of being far too strident against China.
Andrew Hastie shouldn't be the template against which we discuss our China relationship. That's exactly the point I'm making. Like, there are some aspects of what he said which may be valid. There are some aspects I think were inflammatory, obviously the one to which you refer. But Andrew Hastie and other backbenchers shouldn't be the ones defining the discussion about China.
So there you have it. Liberal ministers and prime ministers super careful when talking about China and the South China Sea, certainly not saying that Beijing is breaking the law. And a Liberal backbencher admonished for talking tough about China. Yet now Labor's Penny Wong says Gladys Liu is the government's Dastyari moment.
There have been questions raised for some time about whether Ms Liu is a fit and proper person to be in the Australian Parliament. She gave an interview last night in an attempt to answer some of those questions, and we've only ended up with more questions. I can recall the Liberal Party making Sam Dastyari a test of Bill Shorten's leadership. Well, this is Scott Morrison's test. This is Scott Morrison's test.
Well, I don't know Gladys Liu at all. I've never spoken to her, but this is nonsense. Just a reminder about Dastyari. As a senator, he secretly took money from Chinese donors to pay his personal expenses. He then spruiked Chinese foreign policy, running the Beijing line on the South China Sea rather than Australia's, in a media conference held with his Chinese connections. Dastyari also warned a Chinese donor to leave his phone behind because ASIO might be spying on him. To liken Liu to this unforgivable behaviour is a wild, wild stretch on the evidence so far. She has supported only Australian foreign policy and there are no claims about money. What she must do is clarify her past membership of the China Overseas Exchange Association. Needless to say, the hypocrisy here is palpable because many of the journalists and politicians who defended Sam Dastyari to the end are now preemptively condemning Gladys Liu. These issues are too important, way too important, to be swayed by what political side the MPs are on. What matters here are the facts and only the facts.